And then one day, that very man brought another woman home and said, "You can stay as the housekeeper." She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She turned away, taking her son's hand, and walked out of the mansion she had built with her own hands. Outside, the rain poured down. The little boy asked, "Mom, where are we going?" And she answered, "To a place where we can be ourselves." That was the beginning of a journey, from loss to peace, from ashes to rebirth. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a reminder to everyone who's ever been left behind. You don't need anyone to save you. You need the courage to rise. Stay with me through this story if you've ever carried a wound like that. Hit subscribe, click like, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the touching journey of Grace Miller, the woman who walked through betrayal and found herself again, rising from the ashes. Poe? That morning, the early winter sunlight streamed through the wide glass window, sliding across the marble countertop. The air in the Greenwich mansion was so still, you could hear the wind brushing through the maple trees outside. Grace Miller stood alone in the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she held the knife. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the aroma of toasted bread, a smell once comforting, now hollow. She couldn't remember the last time Ethan, her husband, had breakfast at home. Perhaps months ago. His mornings were now filled with meetings, hurried phone calls, and the fading sight of his back disappearing through the dark wooden door. The knife slipped. The cold steel sliced into her fingertip. A thin red line spread across the white cutting board. Grace stared at the blood, feeling no pain, only a strange sense of disbelief. That vivid red felt too real, while the rest of her life had grown so painfully fake. She lifted her hand, watching the drops fall onto the floor, when a voice came from behind. "Mom, are you hurt?" 14-year-old Noah, brown-haired with his father's eyes, ran toward her. He grabbed a tissue and pressed it against her finger. Grace forced a small smile. "It's just a scratch, sweetheart." Noah looked at her, his eyes older than his age. "But you're shaking." Grace lowered her gaze, hiding the tears gathering in her eyes. "I'm just a little cold." She sat down, overseeing her son open a bandage and wrap her finger, his quiet concentration tightening the ache in her chest. This boy in 14 years had never seen his mother cry, and Grace had never allowed herself to break in front of him. When he finished, Noah whispered, "I think you're sad, not hurt." Grace tried to laugh, but his voice caught her off guard. He understood her better than the man she'd lived with for 15 years. After Noah left for school, Grace cleaned the kitchen as usual. She wiped the blood, washed the board, lined up the knives neatly as if tidiness could somehow bring order back to her heart. But the more she cleaned, the more her tears spilled, falling to the floor and blending into the cold water. She remembered their first morning after the wedding. Ethan had wrapped his arms around her, kissed her shoulder, and whispered, "As long as I have you, I need nothing else." That sentence once marked the beginning of a dream. Now, it was just a faded scar on her heart. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message lit up. "Meeting ran late. Don't wait up." 4 words, and it felt like the house itself was collapsing inward. Grace set the phone down, wondering why she still felt disappointed when she should have grown used to it by now. Outside, golden sunlight shone over the lake. She opened the fridge and began to prepare dinner mechanically. Her hands moved. Her mind was empty. Sometimes, she wasn't sure if she was still living or just the shadow of someone who used to. That afternoon, she went out to water the roses Ethan once told her to tend to make the house prettier. He didn't look at them anymore, didn't care if they bloomed or died. A petal fell onto her palm, damp with dew, soft as an unspoken goodbye. Night came. The ticking clock echoed through the living room. Grace sat on the couch, waiting even though she knew he wouldn't come home. The TV was on, but no one was watching. On the screen, a couple embraced under the rain, and she wondered did she even remember what that felt like. The lock turned. Ethan walked in same grey suit, expensive cologne, expressionless face. "You're still up?" "Yeah. I was waiting for you." "Don't do that. I'm busy." He walked past her. No kiss, no touch. No. "How was your day?" Just a shadow passing through her life, leaving behind the cold scent of his cologne. Grace watched him go, her voice barely a whisper. "Of course, you always are." When the bedroom door closed, she sat there silently, listening to her heartbeat fade. Somewhere in that vast house, something inside her cracked quietly, without a sound. Only silence remained, thick, heavy, and sharp as needles pressing into her heart. The next morning, Grace woke earlier than usual. The grey light of dawn slipped through the curtains. The room was neat, perfect, soulless. A woman taught to keep everything intact, even while her heart was falling apart. She went downstairs, brewed her coffee, and made breakfast for Noah. He was still asleep, his face peaceful and young. Grace smiled faintly. She might not have had the strength to stand without him. After he left for school, she changed clothes, drove to the supermarket, and stopped by the flower shop on the corner, the one where she had bought her first bouquet when they moved into the mansion. The older woman behind the counter still had the same gentle smile. "It's been a while, Grace. White roses again?" "Yes. White roses." Grace touched the petals soft, delicate. She bought a bouquet and placed it on the dining table, where only cold plates had sat for months. That afternoon, she cleaned Ethan's office. When she opened his drawer, she found an old photograph, their wedding photo. She in white, he in black, their hands clasped, faces glowing. On the back, he had written, "For the rest of our lives." She laughed, a dry, empty sound with no trace of tears. Then she folded the photo and placed it back, burying a part of her that had already died. That evening, she and Noah ate dinner in silence. Noah talked about school and his friends, trying to make her smile. But every time he mentioned Dad, the air froze. "Mom, does Dad ever come home early?" Grace looked at her plate and whispered, "He's just swamped. So busy he forgets you?" Her heart clinched. She didn't blame him for asking, because that same question echoed inside her every night. Later, when Noah was asleep, Grace sat alone on the porch. Winter air carried the scent of pine. She looked up at the sky, no stars, only clouds. She remembered the night Ethan proposed in the middle of a glowing New York street, under Christmas lights and music. He had knelt and said he'd never let her be alone. She whispered, "You kept your promise, you just let me be lonely beside you." A tear rolled down, warm against her skin, unlike the blood from the day before, but carrying the same message. Some wounds are never accidental. That night, before bed, she looked at the cut on her finger, dry now, leaving only a faint scar. She knew she'd forget it soon. But the real wound wasn't on her hand. It lived inside her chest, where the cut didn't bleed, but kept sinking deeper every day. And somewhere in the dark silence of that house, the ticking clock went on slow, steady, counting down to the day everything would fall apart. That morning, Grace woke with a strange feeling. Light from the window fell across the sea-green dress hanging neatly on the chair, casting a soft reflection on the wall. She reached out, fingertips brushing the cool silk, smoothing its perfect folds. It was the dress Ethan had chosen for her in their second year of marriage, back when he still cared about what she wore. She'd chosen sea green because he once said, "That color makes you look like summer." But summer had long passed, leaving a silence as endless as winter. Her vanity table was already set: powder, perfume, small earrings, the little rituals she still kept, even though no one seemed to notice anymore. She didn't know why she continued to prepare so carefully. Maybe because she refused to become that pitiful wife, even when her marriage was already in ruins. Noah sat on the stairs, holding a slice of toast. "Is Dad going with you tonight?" Grace paused. "Probably. It's an important event." Noah stared at her, his 14-year-old eyes far too cold for his age. "I don't believe that." He turned and went upstairs, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Grace with an emptiness she couldn't name. Her son was starting to see the truth she'd tried to hide, and the cruelest part was she couldn't deny he was right. That afternoon, Ethan came home. He wore a black suit and grey tie, calm, polished, and unreadable. "Would you like me to drive with you?" she asked softly. Without looking at her, he said, "I'll go ahead. You should arrive later with the committee. It'll look better for the press." A simple sentence, cold as a blade. She forced a smile. Of course. After he left, silence swallowed the house. On the kitchen counter, the white roses she'd arranged that morning were still fresh, but in the harsh sunlight, Their petals looked pale as bone. Grace took a deep breath, went upstairs, dressed, and did her makeup. In the mirror stood a woman with a polite smile, neatly drawn eyeliner, red lips perfect in every way except her eyes. They were tired, empty, the eyes of someone who hadn't been loved in a very long time. As the limousine drove her toward Manhattan, rain began to fall. Streetlights reflected off the window, and she saw her face in the glass blurred, distant, almost unfamiliar. The Riverside Hotel glittered with light. When the doors opened, people surrounded her, handshakes, smiles, greetings, the rapid flash of cameras. Grace returned each gesture with poised grace, performing a role she'd mastered long ago. Ethan stood on stage in the grand hall with the company's board members and benefactors. When he saw her, he smiled faintly, the kind of polite smile that never reached his eyes. She stood at the back of the room, her heart warming just a little when he said, "And now, I want to give special thanks to my wife, who I always stood by through this project." Grace smiled. Applause filled the hall. Then Ethan continued, his voice smooth, practiced, "And to the woman who showed me that love comes in many forms, please welcome Ava Laurent." A young woman stepped out from behind the curtain, slim, in a red gown, with pale blue eyes. She smiled and slipped her hand into Ethan's as if they'd belonged to each other forever. Time stopped. Grace froze in place. The applause still rang out hollow, false, mixing with the clatter of camera shutters. She heard nothing, saw nothing, only the blinding stage lights and a voice echoing in her head. "Please welcome my new partner." Her hand trembled around her glass. Wine spilled over the rim. The glass slipped and shattered. Heads turned. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, that's her." Noah stood nearby. She had brought him along tonight, staring at the stage, confused but not entirely. Ethan's eyes, when he looked at Ava, told him everything. He rushed to his mother, grabbing her hand. "Mom, let's go." Grace didn't move. Her gaze stayed on Ethan, the man who once swore he'd never make her hurt. Now he held another woman's hand, wearing the same smile that used to belong only to her. Ava bowed slightly, her lips curling into a delicate, almost pitying smile. Grace set her glass down and turned away. No one stopped her. No one dared. Only the sound of camera shutters echoed behind her like a heart breaking into 100 pieces. Outside, rain poured hard. It hit the pavement, blurring the city lights. Noah took off his jacket and held it over her head. "Mom, are you okay?" Grace didn't answer. She walked quickly to the car, heels sinking into puddles. The sound of rain, her heartbeat, and her breathing merged. In the car, Noah held her hand, his eyes red. "I hate him. I hate what he did to you." Grace squeezed his hand. "Don't hate, Noah. Just remember." Through the rain-streaked window, she saw Ethan and Ava inside, smiling, posing for cameras, flash after flash lighting up their faces. People laughed, toasted, and celebrated. At that moment, Grace realized that she had never truly belonged in that world. The car pulled away through the rain. Grace leaned back, eyes closed. The images replayed: Ethan's hand in Ava's, the applause, the smile looping endlessly like a film that refused to stop. When they got home, she changed out of the dress and removed her jewelry piece by piece. Each clink against the table sounded like the breaking of her pride. Noah walked in with a towel. "You're soaked, Mom. Let me help." She sat on the bed, hair tangled, lipstick faded. "You don't have to. I want to." He dried her hair gently, awkwardly, but with care. And that simple act shattered her last bit of restraint. The tears came, years of silence, and forced strength finally spilling out in her son's fragile arms. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." Noah held her tight, whispering, "Don't be. You didn't do anything wrong." Those words, so soft, were enough to break her completely. That night, Grace didn't sleep. The rain outside fell steadily, endlessly. She sat on the porch, holding a glass of wine, staring into the dark. Her reflection in the glass showed two silhouettes, one woman she used to be, and one she was becoming. She knew that the moment Ethan held another woman's hand in front of everyone, the wife in her had died. But perhaps, in that exact moment, the woman in her had finally begun to live. By morning, Ethan still hadn't come home. The headlines flooded the internet. Ethan Miller introduces new partner young entrepreneur Ava Laurent. Tycoon's wife leaves gala in tears. Grace didn't read the full articles. She only saw the photo herself in the sea green dress, soaked in rain, eyes empty, lips pressed tight. She saved the picture, not to remember, but to remind herself. This was the last day she let someone else define her worth. She opened the closet, took out a suitcase. Noah saw and froze. "Mom, where are we going?" Grace met his eyes, her voice calm but firm. "We're leaving. I won't live in a house without love anymore." Noah didn't ask another word. He just nodded and helped her pack. When the door closed behind them, the rain had stopped. The white mansion stood silent, holding only the echoes of a glittering night, when all the glamour crumbled, leaving one woman standing in the rain, learning how to begin again. 3 days after the gala, the mansion in Greenwich was as silent as if nothing had happened. Grace made her morning coffee the same routine as always, but somehow it tasted more bitter than usual. Every corner of the house, every clock ticking, whispered that everything had changed. Ethan still hadn't come home, only a few calls from his assistant meeting updates. Numbers, polite, but soulless words. Noah went to school quietly. He didn't ask, didn't complain. He just left a small note on the breakfast table. "Don't cry, Mom. I'm still here." That afternoon, the iron gate creaked open. A black SUV rolled into the driveway. Grace stood by the window and saw Ava step out, long coat, neat hair, a set of keys in her hand. No one had told Grace Ava was coming. No one warned her that the mistress was moving in. The door opened. Ava walked straight in, eyes sweeping over the living room like someone inspecting her new property. Ethan followed behind, calm, collected as if everything were perfectly reasonable. "What is she doing here?" Grace asked, her voice unnervingly steady. Ethan didn't meet her eyes. "From today, Ava will be living with us. I want this transition to be civil." "Civil?" Grace repeated, letting out a faint laugh. "You call bringing your mistress home civilized?" Ethan looked away, silent. Ava tilted her head slightly, her tone light, almost courteous. "If it makes you uncomfortable, I can arrange another place for you. After all, you used to own this house." Her voice was soft, but every word carried quiet mockery. Grace looked straight into the young woman's eyes, polished, empty, shameless. "I don't need your pity," Grace said slowly. "This house, I built it. Every brick, every wall, I chose myself. If anyone's leaving, it won't be me." Ethan took a step forward. "Grace, don't turn this into drama. I want peace. Ava isn't to blame." Grace laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Not to blame? She stole another woman's husband. Or are you just trying to dress your betrayal in nicer words?" Silence fell. Only the soft patter of rain touched the windows. Ava set her bag down, voice calm and cold. "You can stay, if you like. Maybe as the housekeeper. I'll need someone to watch the place when I travel." Noah, who had been standing on the stairs, heard everything, his fists clenched. "What did you just say?" Ava turned, still smiling. "Hello there. You must be Noah. Your father told me you're a good kid. Did you just tell my mum to be your maid?" Ethan cut in sharply. "Noah, this is between adults." "No." His voice cracked, trembling with anger. "You call this adult? You lied to Mom, you brought her here, and now you want us to live with her? Is this what love looks like to you?" The room froze. Ava stepped back slightly, though her eyes stayed defiant. Ethan advanced toward his son. "You're being disrespectful." Noah's eyes glistened, but his voice didn't waver. "No, you're the one disrespecting this family." Ethan raised his hand and then smack. A sharp sound broke the air. Noah had slapped Ava. Everyone went still. Under the warm light, a red mark bloomed on Ava's pale cheek, the imprint of a small, trembling hand. Grace stood frozen. The world seemed to stop for a second. Ethan's face turned red. "You insolent boy," he shouted. Noah stood his ground, tears shining but gaze fierce. "I'm not sorry. I'll never be sorry." Grace stepped forward, pulling him behind her. Her voice shook, but her eyes were firm. "Enough, Ethan. You've done enough. You're defending him after he hit someone. I'm defending what's left of me. Ethan said nothing. Ava turned away, touched her cheek lightly, then let out a small, amused laugh. How fascinating. I suppose I'll get used to the atmosphere here. Grace looked at her long, steady, final, a look that would be burned into memory for the rest of her life. Then she turned to her son. Pack your things, Noah. We're leaving. That night, the rain came down hard. Street lights cast golden streaks through the windows, glowing over the stacked boxes by the door. Noah helped her pack in silence. Each sound, the zipping of a suitcase, the closing of a drawer, felt like another piece of her life being cut away. Every shirt, every book, every small decoration carried the ghost of the days she once believed in. She stopped in the hallway, in front of a framed family photo, the three of them smiling under the Malibu sun, taken on their 10th anniversary. Ethan had said then, "Nothing will ever tear us apart." She took the photo down gently and placed it in the suitcase. "We'll keep this," she whispered, "just to remember that we once existed." Ethan never appeared. He was likely upstairs with Ava, sealing his betrayal in silence. Noah turned to her. "Mom, are you sad?" Grace paused, her voice low, steady. "Yes. But being sad doesn't mean being weak." He hugged her tightly. "I promise, I'll protect you." They stepped outside. The wind howled, and rain lashed their faces. Grace looked back at the house one last time, the home she'd built brick by brick, flower by flower. Now it was just a gilded cage full of broken memories. Upstairs, the light in the second-floor room still glowed Ethan and Ava's new world. Grace didn't look twice. The car door shut. Noah sat beside her, eyes fixed forward. Grace started the engine. The low hum filled the night, heavy, final. As they drove out through the gates, she felt something snap inside, a thin, invisible string breaking free. Nothing left to tie her down. Nothing left to save. On the road, Noah leaned against her shoulder and whispered, "Mom, where are we going?" Grace exhaled, voice raspy but calm. "Somewhere we can start over." The car sped into the night, past empty streets and glistening lights, reflections on the window like tears that had finally fallen. Behind them, the Miller mansion faded into the rain, tall, cold, and hollow. Ahead lay a stretch of road leading nowhere in particular. But for the first time in years, Grace could feel her heart beating hard, not from fear, but freedom. She reached out the window, letting the rain kiss her skin. "Freedom," she whispered. "Sometimes it's just leaving the place that made you forget who you are." And the small car disappeared into the dark of Connecticut, carrying two souls. A woman who had lost everything, and a boy who had just learned that sometimes defiance is the deepest form of love. Ava Laurent had always believed that life was a negotiation, and whoever was weaker would always pay the higher price. From a young age, she learned that people weren't loved for being good, they were loved for being useful. She was born in Louisiana, in a crumbling neighborhood where her parents' fights were the soundtrack of every night. When she was 9, she was sent to foster care after her mother was arrested for stealing painkillers. That was where she learned her first rule: no one saves you except yourself. Her first guardian was an old, heavy-set man who called her his little doll. She heard the door creak open every night and pretended to sleep. At 12, she ran away. 3 years later, she already knew how to survive using the only weapon she had, her beauty. At 18, she met Marcus Webb, a washed-up financial broker with a sharp mind and no conscience. He saw something in her that others didn't dare look at: a storm wrapped in silk. Marcus taught her how to talk, look a rich man in the eye without flinching, and make him believe she needed him when, in truth, it was he who needed her. She never loved anyone. To her, love was the prettiest trap the world had ever built for women. When Ava met Ethan Miller, she was 28. He was the picture of power, tall, composed, with that half-smile that made people want to believe in him. They met at a Manhattan charity gala. Ava didn't make the first move. Ethan did. "I think we've met before," he said. She smiled. "I never forget a face like yours, probably not." And just like that, the game began. Ethan, a man bored with the safety of marriage. Ava, a woman who knew exactly how to become someone's favorite poison. They consumed each other. While Ethan thought he was in control, Ava held the reins. That night, after he fell asleep, Ava sat up, opened her laptop, and sent an email to Marcus. Target secured. Phase 2 begins. The plan had been 6 months in the making: get close to Ethan, manipulate his emotions, then siphon funds through fake investment accounts. Everything was flawless, until Ava saw the photo of Grace. It hung in Ethan's office, a brown-haired woman with soft eyes and a gentle smile. There was nothing fancy about her, no pride, no fear, no facade, just something deeply real. From that day, every time Ethan mocked Grace, Ava felt an odd discomfort twist in her chest. "She's just good at baking and raising the kid," Ethan scoffed once. "I don't know why I ever loved her." Ava had smiled back. "Because you needed someone to believe in you. Now you don't." But that night, she couldn't sleep. Grace's face kept appearing in the mirror, a quiet reminder that there was something Ava could never learn. "Kindness," Marcus called. "Everything on track?" "Yes. He's starting to trust me." "Good. 6 more months. Don't get soft." She hung up and looked out the window. Under the moonlight, Ethan's car sat parked outside Grace's house. He didn't go in. He just stood there for a few minutes, then drove away. Ava wondered if it was guilt or just habit. The next day, she walked into his office while he was watching the news. "Tell me about her," she said. "About Grace. Are you jealous?" "No." "Curious." Ethan smiled, arrogance in his eyes. "She's weak, Ava. Not like you." Ava smiled back, but inside, she felt hollow. She was far weaker than Grace, only better at hiding it. The night Noah slapped her, Ava didn't feel angry. She stood in the bathroom, staring at her reflection, fingertips touching the red mark on her cheek. It stung, but it didn't hurt. The real pain came from what she saw in the mirror. A woman who had once been a victim, now becoming the very thing she used to fear. Years ago, she remembered that rough hand, the helplessness, the terrified 12-year-old girl in the mirror. And now, she was standing in the same place, only on the other side. Marcus called again. "We're moving faster. The press is sniffing around Ethan." "I know, but he hasn't transferred everything yet." "Then make him trust you more. Sleep with him more. Lie sweeter." Ava hung up, exhausted. Outside, Ethan was on the phone, talking about his empire. She knew it was all about to collapse just a few clicks away. Ethan entered the room, wearing that same self-assured smile. "I'm thinking of going to Europe. Paris. Come with me." "And your wife?" "She'll be fine. She's used to it." Ava looked at him, and for a brief moment, she saw how small he was. A man who had everything, yet couldn't keep his family. A rich man so emotionally bankrupt, he could only buy affection through betrayal. Ava closed her eyes when he pulled her close, and tears fell down her face. Ethan thought they were from passion, but they were the tears of a woman who knew she was betraying the last piece of right inside her. The next morning, she went downstairs and saw Noah packing. He looked at her briefly, silent. She wanted to speak, to apologize, but didn't know how. "Noah." He turned, eyes sharp as glass. "What do you want?" "I'm sorry." "You don't have to be," he said flatly. "You'll never understand who my mom is, but one day you'll realize what you've lost." He walked away. The door shut, and that sentence haunted Ava for years, long after everything else had fallen into place. That evening, she boarded a plane with Ethan, bound for Paris. In her suitcase, besides clothes and a passport, was a hard drive containing every financial file Ethan owned. All she had to do was press send, and Marcus would have it. It would all be over. She glanced at Ethan, asleep beside her, and that smug smile still lingered. She whispered, "You'll never understand. The woman you called weak, she's the strongest of us all." The plane sliced through the clouds, leaving behind a sleeping city. And somewhere deep inside Ava Laurent, something shifted. She didn't know if it was guilt or just exhaustion, but for the first time, she wished she weren't so good at lying. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building in Astoria, Queens. Every morning, the sound of the subway rattled the window panes. Grace stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching people rush past below. From the Rose Garden mansion in Greenwich to this 30-square-meter room, she felt like she had fallen from heaven to earth. But at least here, no one could make her feel small. On the first day, They had 2 suitcases, a folding bed, and a used dining table bought from a neighbor. When Noah asked where she wanted the table, she said, "By the window. I want to see the light." Light, something she'd always had too much of, yet never truly felt until now. That evening, while Noah assembled a makeshift bookshelf, Grace sat on the floor scrolling through old photos on her phone. Family trips, birthdays, Ethan's smile. She couldn't bring herself to delete them, but couldn't look at them for long either. The last photo was of little Noah, face smeared with frosting, eyes crinkled in laughter. Grace smiled softly and touched the screen. "We're going to be okay, sweetheart," she whispered. The next day, Noah started at the nearby public school, nothing fancy, but full of genuine laughter. And Grace, after years of being only a wife and mother, found a part-time job at a little cafe on the corner, Maple and Steam Cafe. The place was small, a few tables, roasted beans and baked bread smell, soft indie music in the background. The first time she carried a tray, her hands trembled, not from exhaustion but from the strange, thrilling sense of being free again, in a world where the name Miller meant nothing. Most customers were office workers and elderly locals. Everyone was busy, yet they all smiled when she brought their coffee. That simple kindness made it easier to breathe. The owner, a warm woman named Maria, said one day, "You look like someone who used to have everything. Maybe because I did. And lost it all? No, I just left it behind." Maria studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Then welcome to the world of people who finally know they're alive." That night, Grace came home with a small bag of croissants for Noah. He was bent over his homework, the lamp casting a soft glow over his face, and she suddenly saw how fast her little boy was growing. "Take a break, honey. I brought something for you. I'm studying. Big test tomorrow." "You're doing great, Noah." "I'm not. I just don't want you to worry." Her chest tightened. She walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry you had to grow up so soon." He looked up, smiling gently. "It's okay. I want to see you smile again." And Grace smiled for the first time in months, a genuine smile, unforced and light. That night, the city hummed softly outside. Grace lay on her small bed, listening to Noah's steady breathing from the next room. The lamp cast a warm, golden glow on the ceiling. She realized then this apartment wasn't just a shelter. It was a beginning. She closed her eyes and saw herself again, the woman who once waited in a cold kitchen for a door that never opened. She wasn't waiting anymore, only for sunrise. One February morning, Noah pulled her out of the apartment. "You need some air, Mom. It's too stuffy in here." Grace laughed. "It's freezing, honey. The colder it is, the more we need to move. I'm buying you coffee." They walked a few blocks to Maple and Steam. Today, she was a customer. Maria smiled when she saw her. "Grace Miller, a day off?" "No. My son insisted I take one." Noah grinned, leading her to a seat by the window. Winter sunlight fell across their faces, softening everything it touched. Hot coffee arrived, and warm pastries were on the side. Noah looked at her and said quietly, "I like it here." "Why?" "Because here, you're not sad." Grace stayed silent for a moment, then nodded. "You're right, I'm not." They talked about school, movies, and Maria's plan for a weekend music night. Sometimes Grace fell quiet, just watching her son. In his eyes, she saw light, and in that light, she saw herself, the version that had never been free until now. Snow began to fall when they left, light flakes melting in her hair. "Mom, there's snow on your head." "Oh? It looks like you're smiling with the sky." She laughed, her breath turning to mist, her laughter mingling with the gentle sound of falling snow, 2 souls learning how to begin again. That evening, Grace received an email from an old friend, Olivia Chen, a journalist who'd once worked with Ethan. "I heard what happened. I'm starting a small community project, nothing big, but it could be a fresh start if you're interested." Grace read the message for a long time. She didn't reply right away, but a quiet voice inside her said, "Maybe it's time to return, not to prove anything, to live again." She closed the laptop and walked to the window. Outside, snow blanketed the narrow street in white. The yellow streetlight cast the faint shadows of two figures, a mother and her son. Grace placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "I survived. Now it's time to live." The next morning, she woke before Noah, brewed coffee, opened the window, breathed deeply. No more ticking clocks. No more reflections of anyone but herself. Across the street, a man was hanging a small sign on a new storefront, Reynolds Art Studio. Opening soon. He looked up and caught her gaze. He smiled, gentle, courteous. Grace smiled back. She didn't know it then, but that simple moment, a quiet exchange between two people learning how to live again, would mark the beginning of the next chapter of her life. That spring, the snow melted faster than usual. The city seemed washed clean after a long, grey winter. Grace had begun working for Olivia Chen's community project, a program helping women rebuild their lives after divorce. The pay wasn't much, but Grace felt helpful for the first time in years. Every morning she woke early, put on her long coat, drank her coffee, and took the subway to Manhattan. She wasn't afraid to walk through the city alone for the first time in a long time. She was learning to speak, smile, and meet people's eyes without lowering her own. Olivia once told her, "You have the calm glow of someone who's been broken, but didn't fall apart." Grace smiled. "I'm not strong, Liv. I don't want Noah to see me weak." Noah was 15 now, taller, thinner, with a gaze far too grown for his age. He didn't talk much and often came home late, saying he was studying with friends or staying at the library. Grace didn't question it. She believed her son was adjusting to their new life. She didn't know Noah went to a shabby internet cafe near school every afternoon, sat in the corner, and opened his laptop searching everything he could find about Ethan Miller. The man who had once seemed invincible, the man who had broken their home. Noah saved every article, every financial report, every shady document linked to Miller Capital. He wrote down numbers, names, and dates not out of hatred, but because he needed the truth. One evening, he came home late. Grace was waiting, worried. "Where were you, Noah?" "Studying. At the library." "Yeah, the library." She nodded, asking no more. Behind her, Noah looked down, clutching his backpack inside it, a USB drive full of data about his father's crimes. That night, he sat in his room, the screen's glow lighting his face. As he typed, he whispered, "Mom's endured enough. It's my turn now." Grace spoke at a small seminar organized by Olivia's project the next day. She stood on stage, her voice trembling but clear. "We can't change what's behind us, but we can choose how to walk forward. Sometimes, strength isn't about revenge, it's about having the courage to live peacefully after the storm." In the audience, Noah sat quietly, eyes glistening. He thought, peace is what she deserves. But for her to have it, someone has to do what she won't. That night, he sent an anonymous email to Olivia, his mother's friend, the journalist. "I have evidence of Ethan Miller's illegal activities. Don't tell anyone who I am. I want to ensure a man like him can't hurt anyone." Olivia didn't know who had written it, but the attachments left her speechless. Contracts, receipts, wire transfers, even recorded calls. Something inside her told her this wasn't just any whistleblower. Meanwhile, Ethan and Ava still appeared in glossy magazines in Greenwich, smiling at galas, vacationing in Italy, and playing the perfect couple. No one knew that beneath the glitter, everything was about to collapse, and the person lighting the fuse was a 15-year-old boy. 3 weeks later, the headlines exploded. Ethan Miller, financial empire under investigation for fraud and tax evasion. Within hours, 17 civil lawsuits were filed. Multiple agencies launched investigations. Ethan woke up in his Manhattan penthouse to a phone buzzing non-stop. "What the hell is happening?" he shouted. "Who did this?" Ava looked at him calm, detached. "Maybe someone finally saw who you really are." "What did you say?" "Nothing," she said lightly. "Just that some things can't be repurchased, not even trust." He glared at her, confused. She turned away, stepping out to the balcony, breathing in deeply. The plan with Marcus was complete. The money had been transferred, Ethan none the wiser. And yet, as she watched him panic, Ava felt no satisfaction. Somewhere inside her, She remembered Noah's eyes, the fierce eyes of a boy who once stood up for his mother. Grace heard the news while at work. The office buzzed with chatter. Olivia called her aside, handing her a phone. "You should see this." The screen showed Ethan's photo beneath bold headlines. Grace stared for a long time. Then she said quietly, "So, it finally caught up to him." Olivia hesitated. Grace just smiled faintly. "I'm not happy, Liv. Just relieved." That evening, Grace came home. Noah was at the table, pretending to do homework. "Did you hear the news?" she asked. "What news?" "About your father." He looked up, a flash of something in his eyes, then quickly looked down. Grace's voice softened. "Do you feel sorry for him?" Noah stopped writing. "No, Mum. I think some people need to lose everything before they understand the value of a quiet dinner at home." Grace watched him for a long moment. In those eyes, she saw the boy who once cried in the rain, now someone strong enough to protect her. "You've really grown up." "No, Mum. I just learned to be strong. From you." Her tears came, not from sadness, but pride. She pulled him into her arms, whispering, "Thank you, Noah. You saved me in a way I never could." Outside, the media storm raged on. Ethan was subpoenaed. Ava vanished with Marcus. The press called it the Miller meltdown. But in a small apartment in Queens, beneath the hum of distant trains, two people sat quietly, mother and son, sipping tea and watching the city lights flicker through the window. They said nothing. They didn't need to. The storm had finally passed, and peace was real for the first time. Reynolds' art studio opened at the end of spring, right across from the cafe where Grace worked. On opening day, she stood across the street, watching through the clear glass. Inside were clay sculptures, raw, earthy, glowing under warm golden light. A tall man, streaks of silver in his hair, was dusting the display counter. He turned, and their eyes met. Grace nodded politely. He smiled in return, gentle, grounded. A few days later, he walked into the cafe. "One cappuccino, light foam," he said, his voice calm and low like a jazz tune at dusk. Grace recognized him and smiled. "You're the one who opened the art studio across the street, right?" He nodded. "Yes, I saw you watching that day." They talked for a few minutes. His name was Adam Reynolds, once an art teacher, now a sculptor who had opened his small studio. His coffee grew cold halfway through, yet the conversation never quite ended. Before leaving, he placed a small card on the counter. "If you ever feel like sculpting, come by. I teach for free, but only to people who know how to smile." Grace laughed softly and slipped the card into her pocket, not thinking she'd ever use it. But that night, she found Noah sketching quietly at the table, the outline of a woman's face, soft and sad. "Who's that?" she asked. "Someone in my head," he said. "Maybe you." When you were younger. She stared at the drawing, the woman's eyes bright, her smile alive. It looked like a version of herself she hadn't seen in years. The next morning, she crossed the street and entered Reynolds' art studio. The smell of clay, varnish, and faint music filled the air, a world apart from hers. Adam was shaping a half-finished sculpture, sunlight tracing the veins in his hands. "I'm here to learn," Grace said. He looked up, smiling. "Good. First rule, don't be afraid to get dirty." He handed her a lump of soft clay. Grace hesitated. It had been years since her hands had touched anything that wasn't routine: cleaning, arranging, waiting. "Grip it," he said gently. "Don't fear getting it wrong. Clay doesn't judge." She pressed her fingers into the cool earth. The texture grounded her, startlingly real. Grace laughed, quiet, but genuine. Adam saw that smile, and in that instant, he knew sometimes one smile is enough to make the world soften. From that day on, she often stopped by after work. At first, she came to learn. Then, she came for peace. Adam spoke a few words, but his silence was never empty. He listened without pity, without judgment, just presence. And that, Grace realized, was something she'd been missing for half her life. One rainy afternoon, she asked, "Have you ever been hurt, Adam?" He nodded. "Of course. Haven't we all? I once thought I'd never trust anyone again. So what changed? I realized trust isn't about whether people deserve it, it's about whether you're brave enough to open up again." Grace didn't answer, but his words sank deep, like rain into dry earth. She didn't say it aloud, but she knew maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to believe again. Their bond didn't bloom in grand gestures or cinematic romance. It grew quietly in the evenings they spent side by side, he shaping clay, she pouring tea. In their silences, the truest things were said. One evening, Adam asked, "Do you ever think about forgiving your past?" "Forgiving who?" "Yourself." Grace froze. The question cut deep. "I used to think I was stupid," she said softly. "Blind. That I let someone else decide my whole life. I don't know how to forgive that." "Then start," Adam said, "by not calling yourself a victim anymore. You're just someone who loved wrong and survived. That's all." Grace looked at him, really looked, and saw that he wasn't there to rescue her. He saw her as she was. Not the ex-wife of a fallen tycoon, not the betrayed woman, just Grace. A woman learning to live truthfully again. That night, Noah teased her. "Mom, you've been smiling a lot lately. What's going on?" "I'm just learning how to live again," she said. "Does that have anything to do with the sculptor guy across the street?" He grinned. Grace laughed. "You notice everything, don't you?" "I notice when you're happy. That's enough for me." Days passed. Old wounds began to fade. Grace and Adam started hosting free sculpture classes for neighborhood kids. Noah helped decorate. The cafe next door brought pastries and tea. The little studio is filled with laughter, clay-streaked hands, and the soft hum of new beginnings every weekend. One late evening, after everyone had gone, Grace paused in front of a half-finished bust, a woman's face, calm and kind. "Who is she?" she asked. Adam's voice was quiet. "My wife." Grace froze. "She died in an accident 4 years ago," he continued. "I lost everything after that. Until I opened this place. She once told me, if you keep creating beauty, then I'll still exist somewhere." Grace stood silent for a long time. Then she reached out and touched the sculpture gently. She must have been pleased. "I hope so," he said softly. "But I know this, if she was still here, she'd want me to find happiness again." He turned to her then. His gaze was steady, not rushing, not asking, simply seeing her. Two souls who had both fallen, now learning how to stand again. Outside, the rain fell softly. Adam took her hand, his touch feather light, like holding something fragile and sacred. "When you're ready," he said, "just tell me. I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere." Grace looked at him, fear and warmth tangled in her chest. "You don't know how afraid I am of love, Adam." "I do," he said gently, "because I've been afraid too. But real love doesn't rush. It waits." They stood there, silent, two people who had once been lost now quietly finding their way back to themselves and each other. And for the first time, Grace believed. Not every man leaves. Some men stay. New York, early summer. The headquarters of Miller Capital stood silent as stone. In the boardroom on the 40th floor, the same men who once praised Ethan now looked at him with cold detachment. On the screen, a single line flashed. "Primary accounts frozen. Investors demand full withdrawal." Ethan sat at the head of the table, his fists clenched, sweat gathering at his temples. "This is a mistake," he rasped. "I'll fix it." No one answered. His closest associate finally stood. "Ethan, we've checked." Ava Laurent emptied the secondary fund. 180 million. Gone. The air thickened. Ethan shot to his feet, face pale. "That's impossible. I control every—" "She used your name. Your signature." No one questioned it. He staggered, gripping the chair for balance. In that instant, everything collapsed. Ava, the woman he thought would stay, had taken it all. His phone vibrated endlessly on the table, calls from reporters, investors, board members. Across every newsstand, the headline burned. Empire of Ashes, the fall of Ethan Miller. Ethan slumped into his chair, staring out the glass wall at the Manhattan skyline. The city shimmered, alive, indifferent. It didn't care who rose or fell, it simply kept moving, pulsing, breathing. And he, once sure he was part of its light, was now just a trembling shadow inside it. The door opened. His lawyer entered, placing a folder on the table. "They want you to resign, Ethan." "I'm not resigning. If you don't, the board will vote you out. I built this company. I am Miller Capital. The lawyer's voice softened. You were, Ethan. The words cut deeper than any headline. He signed. The pen slipped from his hand. For a fleeting moment, he saw himself years ago, the young man covered in dust, eyes bright with hope, and Grace by his side, handing him coffee, saying, "You'll make it." That sentence had once been fuel. Now it was a verdict. When he exited the tower, the summer rain came down suddenly and hard. His shirt clung to his skin, the chill sinking into his bones. He didn't lift his collar, didn't seek shelter. He just walked faceless among thousands through the city he once believed he owned. That night, he returned to the penthouse. No lights, no Ava, only a note on the pillow. "Thank you for the lesson. Love is a transaction, and I won." He laughed, a dry, broken sound that dissolved into sobs. The grand room echoed, empty but for his own voice, a king undone by his pride. 2 weeks later, Ethan Miller was everywhere. Stocks plummeted, lawsuits stacked up, federal investigations launched. But what terrified him most wasn't losing money. It was losing the mirror, the reflection of admiration in other people's eyes. Once, he entered every room and felt the air shift toward him. Now, no one looked. Or worse, they looked with pity. He stayed in the penthouse, surrounded by unopened envelopes, summonses, lawsuits, foreclosure notices. The TV ran non-stop, narrating his downfall in third person, a dynasty built on deceit. Ethan Miller, from Wall Street legend to fallen idol. He hurled the remote. The screen shattered. Whiskey spilled across the floor. The glass glinted sharp, final. That night, he dreamed. Grace was in the kitchen again, soft light on her face, slicing cake. "You're home early," she smiled. He stepped toward her, but as his hand reached for her shoulder, she vanished. In her place stood Ava, smirking from the shadows. "Did you really think you were any different from me?" He jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Dawn was breaking. He picked up his phone and dialed Grace's number for the first time in months. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail. Her voice, calm, familiar, filled the silence. "Hi, this is Grace Miller. Please leave a message." He said nothing for a long time, just breathed. Then, quietly, "I'm sorry." The next morning, Grace listened to the voicemail. She didn't cry. When Olivia asked, she said softly, "He's paying the price. And maybe, for the first time, he means it." Weeks later, the world learned that Ava and Marcus had fled Europe, wanted for fraud and embezzlement, and Ethan, once the man beneath 1,000 flashes, had sold the penthouse and moved into a small apartment near the Hudson. People said they'd seen him sitting silently on a riverside bench for hours, watching the water silently. One afternoon, he received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single photograph. 3 figures: him, Grace, and Noah smiling on a beach years ago. On the back, a single line written in Grace's hand: "Sometimes losing is the only way to learn how to see." Tears fell onto the picture. He knew it was from her, not as forgiveness, but as release. That evening, Ethan wrote his full confession, a detailed admission of every lie and crime, and sent it to the court. At the bottom, beneath his name, he added one last line: "I once had everything except peace." The lights in the apartment dimmed. Outside, the city still burned bright, indifferent, eternal. And in the quiet, a fallen king sat alone, smiling faintly, the fragile smile of a man who had finally learned that power can never save the soul. One October afternoon, the wind swept through the trees of Astoria. Golden leaves danced along the street, settling on the steps of Grace's apartment. She was in the middle of teaching her sculpture class for children when her phone vibrated. On the screen was a name she thought she'd never see again: Ethan Miller. She froze. Her heartbeat didn't quicken. Instead, she felt something quieter, how one feels when looking at an old, faded photograph. She answered, "Grace, it's me." His voice was low, rough, tired, none of the old confidence or the storm that once tore through her life. "I need to see you," he said. "Just once." Grace stayed silent, eyes drifting toward the window. Outside, Noah was laughing with the neighborhood kids, his smile clear and bright, untouched by his father's shadow. "I'll think about it, Ethan. Please." he whispered. "I just want to say I'm sorry." That night, she told Adam. He didn't react. He just stirred his tea thoughtfully. "Will you go?" he asked. "I don't know. I'm afraid. Seeing him might pull me back. There are fears that only disappear when we face them, Grace." She looked at him. "Aren't you afraid I might change my mind?" Adam smiled softly. "If love can be taken away by one meeting, then I never had it to begin with." Tears welled in her eyes. He reached for her hand, gentle, careful, like touching a scar that's healed but still tender. "Go," he said. "Not for him, for yourself," to close the door. The next day, she went to the cafe where Ethan had asked to meet, a small place near Central Park, warm with amber light and the smell of waffles and slow music. He was already there, thinner, grayer. The tailored suit couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes. When he saw her, he stood, awkward and unsure. "Thank you for coming," he murmured. Grace Saturday, her voice was calm. "What do you want to say?" Ethan looked at her for a long time before exhaling. "I'm sorry, not just for what I did, but for making you believe you were small. I stopped believing that long ago," she said quietly. He lowered his head. "I lost everything. Grace Ava, the company, my name, everything. And only when nothing was left did I realize what was truly valuable. Love? No," he said. "You." Outside, the wind carried a flurry of leaves past the window. She looked at the man who had once been her whole world, now just a stranger gathering up his own ruins. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" she asked. "I don't expect you to come back. I want forgiveness." Grace met his eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from pain, but release. "Forgiveness isn't about whether you deserve it. It's because I don't want to carry you anymore." He nodded slowly. "I understand. And you know," she said softly, "you once told me being small made me lovely. But now I'm bigger, and I like it that way." A faint smile touched his lips. "I'm glad you found peace." "Peace wasn't something I found," she replied. "It's something I built." They sat for a long while. No more words. Nothing left to untangle. When Grace stood, Ethan didn't try to stop her. "I truly wish you happiness," he said quietly. She smiled. "I know. And for the first time, I believe you." She left light as a leaf drifting onto her shoulder, every step a chapter closing behind her. That evening, Grace returned to the studio. Adam was cleaning up, his sleeves rolled, and his shirt had flecks of white paint. He looked up and smiled. "You saw him?" She nodded. "He apologized." "And you?" "I forgave him, but I didn't go back." Adam didn't ask more. He stepped closer and brushed his hand against her cheek. "I knew you'd choose that." She looked at him, voice soft. "Aren't you jealous?" "What would that change? I just wanted to be sure you'd forgiven yourself." Grace smiled, the kind that came from deep within. "I didn't choose you because you're safe, Adam. I chose you because with you, I get to be myself." He smiled back. "That's all that matters." They held each other, quiet and steady. No promises, no chains, just two hearts that had learned. Love isn't about the one who makes you tremble, but the one who makes you calm. The next day, Grace taught her class again. A little girl asked, "Miss Grace, why are all your sculptures smiling?" Grace smiled. "Because if you smile long enough, even scars turn into flowers." That evening, Grace and Adam had dinner with Noah in the studio. Rain fell softly outside. Noah told stories from school. Adam listened, and Grace watched them, one grown, one still growing, realizing that she was still surrounded by love after everything. Not the kind that burns, but the kind that heals. Later, she stepped out onto the porch, tea in hand, watching the rain. Her phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for seeing me. I hope you keep smiling like that, Ethan." Grace smiled faintly and set the phone down. She didn't delete it. She didn't reply. She just watched the rain, letting it wash away the last traces of the past. Sometimes, you don't need to win against someone. You need to stop hurting when you remember them. Inside, Adam called out, "Grace, come here, you have to see what Noah made." She turned. Noah stood by the table, grinning. On it was a small clay sculpture, 3 figures holding hands. Not perfect, but warm, alive. Grace bent down, touched it gently, eyes glistening. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." "No, Mom," Noah said, smiling. "I just made what I see every day." The golden light fell across their faces, 3 smiles intertwined, and for the first time, Grace's smile held no trace of shadow. 10 years later, an autumn morning in Connecticut. Wind rushed through the rows of maple trees, scattering golden leaves like rain. On the cracked facade of the old Miller mansion hung a weathered sign, "For sale, auction property." Grace pulled over and stepped out of the car with Noah. He was 25 now, tall, steady, with the same bright eyes he'd had as a boy. "You sure about this, Mom?" "Yes," she said softly. "It's time to look back once, so we never have to again." The wooden gates were rusted, the paint peeling. They walked through. The garden was wild. Grass overgrown, roses long dead, shattered glass in the windows. What was once perfect now lay in ruins. Grace moved slowly down the hall. The smell of mold and damp wood filled the air. She laid her hand on the wall where their family portrait had once hung. Laughter echoed faintly in her memory, the clink of cutlery, the golden glow of dinners she once thought were happy. Noah looked around, eyes glistening. "I still remember this chair. Dad used to hold me here and read stories." "I remember too," Grace said. "But remembering doesn't mean we want to return." Then came the sound of footsteps behind them. A hoarse voice. "Grace, is that you?" She turned. Ethan stood in the doorway. He looked older, hair almost white, shoulders stooped, eyes tired but gentle. Gone was the power, the arrogance, the man who once broke her heart. "Here to see the house?" he asked. "Yes. I heard it's being auctioned. I came to say goodbye." They stood in silence. The wind whispered through the broken windows. Ethan gave a faint smile. "I used to think this place was the peak of everything. Now I see how foolish I was." "At least you see it now," Grace said. Not bitter, only calm. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am. Not because I have someone. Because I have myself." He nodded, tears shining in the corners of his eyes. "I'm sorry for the 10 years you lost because of me." "No, Ethan," she said gently. "You only taught me what every woman must eventually learn, that no one completes us but ourselves." He smiled faintly, then coughed, his hand trembling. Grace noticed the bottle of pills in his pocket. "You're sick?" "Lung cancer. Final stage," he said quietly, as if it belonged to someone else. "A year, maybe. I don't blame anyone. I regret never learning how to live kindly." Silence filled the air. Grace stepped forward and placed her hand on his shoulder. "I stopped being angry long ago, Ethan." He looked up, voice breaking. "Thank you. You have no idea what that means." Noah stood nearby, eyes wet. "Dad, I don't hate you anymore," he said softly, "but I can't forget." "I know," Ethan replied, "and that's your right." The 3 stood together in the wreck of what was once a home, bathed in late afternoon light. No heroes, no villains, just people finally saying what should have been said years ago. As they left, Grace turned once more. The mansion, once a monument to power and pretense, now just a shadow of memory. She whispered, "We lived here once. Now, let it rest." 10 more years passed. One spring morning, Grace received a call from St. John's Hospital. A nurse's voice, gentle. "Mr. Ethan Miller passed away this morning. He left a letter for you." At the hospital, she opened the white envelope. Inside, his familiar handwriting, shaky, uneven. "Grace, if you're reading this, I've already gone. I don't ask for forgiveness, you gave me that long ago. I only want you to know that the best part of my life wasn't the money or the fame. It was the years I had with you and Noah. I once thought love was possession. Now I know love is letting someone be at peace. I hope I'm good enough to stand beside you again if there's another life. Goodbye, Ethan." Grace folded the letter, tears slipping down her cheeks, not of grief, but of closure. She stepped outside the hospital and looked up at the sky. "Rest in peace, Ethan," she whispered. That evening, she returned home. Adam was on the porch, coffee in hand. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," she said softly. "It's just. Time moves so fast." "Time only takes what isn't meant to stay," he replied. What's truly yours it keeps. She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. Noah came out then, now a college art lecturer. In his hands was a small clay sculpture, the same one they had made years ago. "I'm taking this to my class," he said. "It's beautiful," Adam said. "It tells more than any lesson. I'll tell my students it's a sculpture of a family, not perfect, but real." The sun dipped low, painting the room in gold. Grace sat at her desk, opened her old journal, and wrote the final entry. 10 years ago, I lost everything. Today, I have peace again. Life isn't always fair, but it always gives us what we're ready to deserve." She closed the book, breathed deeply. Outside, cherry blossoms fluttered in the wind, scattering like pale pink snow. Adam stepped behind her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You know, Grace," he said, "sometimes happiness is simply the courage to live quietly." She smiled, "and the grace to hold no hatred." A wind chime tinkled softly. The camera would pull back past the doorway, past the golden light to the three figures laughing together. Behind them, petals rose and drifted into the sunlight, like ashes carried away by the wind. It had all ended, and begun again. If you've stayed with this story until the end, thank you, honestly. Click like, hit subscribe, and share your thoughts below, so we can talk about what's been lost, what remains, and the quiet belief that after every heartbreak, there will always come a day when we smile in peace again.